factory, they had a very small turbocharger, no intercooler, so when the turbo gets hot. Hey, this is Mad Matt from Budget Boostin'. Today we're going to talk about how to change, grease, and repack your front wheel bearings on a rear-wheel drive car, because front-wheel drive cars are different. Most of them have hub and wheel assemblies, hub and bearing assemblies. They're all one piece. These you have to take apart, and you have an inner and outer bearing, inner and outer race. So we're going to focus on that today. So first thing you need to do is, well, get your bearings. Inner bearings, outer bearings, good stuff like that. Get your wheel bearing grease, high temp wheel bearing grease, some brake cleaner or carb cleaner, a bunch of tools, a lot of rags because it's a greasy job. Alright, first thing you have to do is unbolt the brake caliper, which I have removed the bolts for my convenience. So now I just have to take off the caliper, take off the brake caliper, and set it to the side. Alright, next, take off the bearing dust cover, which a nice little hammer and a chisel, take off like a champ. Just like that. Nice and easy. Alright. Next, I need needle nose pliers to remove the cotter pin. Yeah, it's time for a bearing change. Next, to remove the cotter pin. Easy way, grab it with some needle noses, pop it out, cotter pin, and a little retaining nut clip, Now we find the nut size, just like that. Now what you're doing is you loosen this nut and pull the hub off and get the outer bearing out. Then you put the nut back in to get the rear bearing unseated, because the rear bearing is going to stay inside the rotor. So as you're going to see, I'm going to remove the nut first and get the outer bearing out of the way, right? Outer bearing, outer race, out of the way. Don't forget your little retaining washer. Set that to the side. So as you can see, the rear bearing is still installed. So the trick to get that rear bearing and race out is have to put the nut back in and pop it out. So screw the nut back in and pop it out like so. There you have your rear dust seal and your rear bearing assembly out of there. Alright, next thing you do, clean your nastiness out of there. Ugly grease, dust, crap like that. Get rid of all the ugly stuff. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to press out the bearing races, because we got the bearings out, but there's a race that goes on there that's pressed into here. So we got to pound them out. Pound the inner and outer races out. I'm going to need a pointy chisel for this one, because there's a little area inside here that you're looking for. There's a little area you got to push a chisel on and pound it with a hammer to go on both sides so it pops out. Same with the other side, inner and outer races. Also a good time to look at your disc brake rotor too while you're out there. Disc brake rotor looks good and smooth. Looks pretty thick. Good to go. Since we're there. Big hammer, big chisel, pop out the race. Almost out. rounding room. Hear that pop out? There's the race. That would be the outer race, which normally fits inside outer bearing like so. But you have to replace the bearings with the races, or else uneven wear can occur. Because each new bearing comes with a new race. If you do not replace these together in a set, you could wear out your new bearings, because the races are worn to this bearing. Now we're going to pop out the other side. Inner race is popped out, which matches with this inner bearing. Next, we clean the old rotor out a bit, get all this nasty old grease out and dust and what have you. Get ready for the new bearings and the new grease. Nasty stuff. Alright, next we're going to work on the bearing that's the inner bearing and inner race. It's brand new. You always want to be careful not to touch bearings with bare hands. Sometimes you can't help it, but you want to avoid getting the oil from your skin on bearings, so you just want to try to handle them carefully. And dust and all that stuff, keep it away from the bearings. Alright. New bearings, new race. We have to gently press that new bearing and race into the area. One way to do it, take your old bearing, wipe it out a bit. Since we don't have a special press, we can take the old bearing and push it in, just being careful not to get all the garbage and stuff from the old bearing onto the new bearing's race. Now we're going to press in the outer bearing's race. Alright, that one pressed in. Press in the other bearing's race. This little guy. That one's pressed in. Now we got to grease the bearings and put them in. This is the real greasy job right here. Yep, this is the inner bearing. Gotta run it through the grease real good. Kind of like a good grease packing. Nasty stuff. But it does a real good job lubricating your wheel bearings. Just not great for the hands. Most people wear gloves for this shit, but, well, I didn't. And the dust seal. Okay, this bearing. Outer bearing. Retaining washer in the groove. The nuts. This is kind of the tricky part, because you have to go pretty tight to initially seat the rotor with the new bearings, but then you loosen up, and then you tighten up, loosen up, tighten up a few times to make sure it's all seated just right. Then you loosen it enough to put the cotter pin in there, but not too loose. You got to find that happy medium, not to go too loose, not to go too tight, so your wheel bearings spin nice and easy. Initial seat. That's really tight. Loosen it a bit. That should be just right. Dust cover. Here the bearing is greased and repacked. Maybe just reverse what you did with the reverse brake caliper on. Tighten everything up, put the wheel and tire on there, tighten it up, then you grab it axially like this. If you hear any kind of a play or feel any kind of a play, then you need to go back, loosen the jam nut, tighten it, loosen it, tighten it, get it to where you have no movement, but yet smooth operation of the wheel rotor. Smooth actuation, but yet no axial play on the tire and wheel assembly. So, that's all she wrote. Well, thanks for watching, and if you like us on Facebook and on YouTube. And remember, knowledge is power. It's horsepower.